In the end. Everything will work out in the end. On time. Did you arrive at the meeting on time? At first. I didn't like the food at first. By the way. By the way, have you seen my keys? For now. That is all the information we have for now. In fact, it was the best movie I have ever seen. Of course. Of course, you can join us for dinner. On purpose. Did you break the glass on purpose? In general. In general, the weather here is very mild. At least. You should wait at least 10 minutes. In advance. Please let us know your decision in advance. By mistake. I sent the email to the wrong person by mistake. In a hurry. Why are you in such a hurry? On a regular basis. Do you exercise on a regular basis? For instance. You can use fruit, for instance, apples or pears. In touch. Let's keep in touch after the project ends. At the same time. We both arrived at the same time. By any chance. Do you have a pen I can borrow by any chance? In person. I would like to discuss this with you in person. On the way. I will pick up some milk on the way home. In the meantime. The car is being fixed, so in the meantime, I will take the bus. For a change. Let's eat out for a change tonight. In common. We have a lot of interests in common. At once. Please come here at once. On the phone. She has been on the phone for an hour. By heart. I learned the whole poem by heart. In public. It is not polite to shout in public. At all. I don't like this coffee at all. On sale. Are these shoes on sale? In debt. The company is deeply in debt. For good. He is leaving the country for good. In private. Can we speak in private for a moment? At short notice. Thank you for coming at short notice. On behalf of. I am writing on behalf of my manager. By far. This is by far the best restaurant in town. In charge of. Who is in charge of this department? At a loss. I am at a loss for words. On fire. Look, that building is on fire. In vain. All our efforts were in vain. For sure. I will be there tomorrow for sure. In detail. Please explain the plan in detail. At risk. Many lives were at risk during the storm. On vacation. My boss is on vacation this week. By accident. I found this old photo by accident. In trouble. You will be in trouble if you don't finish your homework. At the moment. He is not available at the moment. On average. On average, I work 40 hours a week. In fashion. Long skirts are in fashion this summer. For a while. I am going to rest for a while. In return. I will help you now, and you can help me in return later. At any rate. At any rate, we must finish this by Friday. On second thought. On second thought, I will have the tea instead. By law. You are required to wear a seatbelt by law. In demand. Skilled workers are in high demand right now. At the latest. I need the report by Monday at the latest. On the contrary. I am not tired, on the contrary, I feel full of energy. In a way. In a way, I am glad it happened. For sale. Is this house for sale? In reality. The plan sounds good, but in reality, it is very difficult. At your convenience. Please call me back at your convenience. On display. Many famous paintings are on display at the museum. By hand. This sweater was made by hand. In order. Is everything in order for the meeting? At random. The winner was chosen at random. On duty. Which doctor is on duty tonight? In sight. There is no one in sight. For the sake of. We moved to the country for the sake of the children. In writing. I need the agreement in writing. At peace. He finally feels at peace in his new home. On the whole. On the whole, the event was a success. By oneself. Did you go to the cinema by yourself? In secret. They met in secret to discuss the plan. At cost. He sold the car to his friend at cost. On strike. The bus drivers are on strike today. In any case. I might be late, but in any case, start the meeting without me. For the time being. You can stay here for the time being. In conclusion. In conclusion, I would like to thank everyone for coming. At present. At present, we have no job openings. On guard. The soldiers were on guard all night. By surprise. The news took me by surprise. In progress. Construction work is still in progress. At the age of. He started playing the piano at the age of 5. On the spot. He was hired on the spot. In shape. He exercises every day to stay in shape. For real. Is that story for real? In stock. Do you have this item in stock? At hand. The exams are near at hand. On the line. My reputation is on the line. By force. The police entered the building by force. In summary. In summary, the project was very successful. At first sight. It was love at first sight. On mind. What is on your mind? In response to. I am writing in response to your inquiry. For long. Will you be staying for long? In comparison with. This year's sales are high in comparison with last year's. At the end of. The shop is at the end of the street. On the increase. Crime in this city is on the increase. By check. Can I pay by check? In honor of. The party was held in honor of his retirement. At the top of. She was standing at the top of the stairs. In contrast. The hot weather was in contrast to the cold room. On the basis of. We made the decision on the basis of your report. At all costs. We must win this game at all costs. By means of. They escaped by means of a rope ladder. In terms of. The project was a success in terms of profit. For the most part. The visitors were for the most part students. In accordance with. The play was performed in accordance with the rules. At the beginning of. I always feel tired at the beginning of the week. On the edge of. The city is on the edge of a large lake. In addition to. In addition to the cake, I bought some ice cream. By nature. He is a very shy person by nature. In the long run. It will save us money in the long run. At a glance. I could tell at a glance that something was wrong. On the increase. House prices are on the increase again. In the mood for. Are you in the mood for a movie tonight? For certain. I cannot say for certain when he will arrive. In particular. Is there anything in particular you want to see? At the expense of. He built the business at the expense of his health. On a diet. I cannot eat cake because I am on a diet. By choice. She lives alone by choice. In harmony with. We should live in harmony with nature. At the bottom of. The keys were at the bottom of my bag. On the horizon. There are new challenges on the horizon. In moderate amounts. You can eat chocolate in moderate amounts. For granted. Do not take your health for granted. In the dark. I was kept in the dark about the secret. At any moment. The bus should be here at any moment. On average. On average, we receive 10 calls a day. By standard. This work is not up to the required standard. In the habit of. He is in the habit of reading before bed. At odds with. His actions are at odds with his words. On the alert. The guards were on the alert for any movement. In theory. In theory, the plan should work perfectly. For instance. Many countries, for instance, France and Italy, are in Europe. In custody. The suspect is currently in police custody. At high speed. The car was traveling at high speed. On edge. Everyone was on edge before the exam results. By definition. A square is, by definition, a rectangle. In ruins. The old castle was in ruins. At the mercy of. The small boat was at the mercy of the waves. On loan. This book is on loan from the library. In pursuit of. They spent their lives in pursuit of happiness. For lack of. The project failed for lack of funding. In the middle of. He woke up in the middle of the night. At ease. I always feel at ease in my own home. On good terms. Are you on good terms with your neighbors? By the time. By the time I arrived, the meeting had ended. In brief. Please tell me the story in brief. At any cost. I will protect my family at any cost. On a large scale. The company produces cars on a large scale. In error. The money was paid to you in error. For once. For once, he was actually early for work. In fear of. They lived in fear of being discovered. At the front of. She sat at the front of the bus. On thin ice. You are on thin ice with the boss right now. By all means. If you want to come with us, by all means, do. In comparison. The city is small in comparison to London. At the peak of. He was at the peak of his career. On top of. On top of everything else, my car broke down. In support of. I am speaking in support of the new law. For effect. He paused for effect before speaking. In disguise. The king traveled among his people in disguise. At will. You can enter and leave the building at will. On the brink of. The two countries are on the brink of war. By air. It is much faster to travel by air. In the light of. The decision was made in the light of new evidence. At a distance. I could see the mountains at a distance. On schedule. The train arrived exactly on schedule. In the wake of. There was a lot of cleaning to do in the wake of the party. For ages. I haven't seen you for ages. In common with. I have nothing in common with my brother. At regular intervals. The buses run at regular intervals. On account of. The game was cancelled on account of rain. By chance. I met an old friend by chance today. In advance of. We arrived at the airport in advance of our flight. At the point of. He was at the point of giving up. On the payroll. How many people are on the payroll? In cold blood. The crime was committed in cold blood. For life. They have been friends for life. In memory of. The statue was built in memory of the fallen soldiers. At the sight of. He fainted at the sight of blood. On business. I am traveling to New York on business. By profession. She is a lawyer by profession. In power. Which political party is currently in power? At the wheel. You must be careful when you are at the wheel. On demand. Movies are available on demand. In step with. We need to stay in step with the latest technology. For the sake of. Let's not argue for the sake of the children. In control of. You need to be in control of your emotions. At random. The names were chosen at random from a hat. On the move. He is always on the move and never stays still. By virtue of. She got the job by virtue of her experience. In love with. He is deeply in love with her. At the thought of. She smiled at the thought of going home. On the surface. On the surface, he seems very friendly. In association with. The event was held in association with a local charity. For use. This tool is for professional use only. In season. Strawberries are in season right now. At a standstill. Traffic was at a standstill for 2 hours. On the road. How long have you been on the road? In short. In short, we need to find a new plan. On the way out. I'll take the trash on the way out. At the rear of. The garden is at the rear of the house. By the side of. We sat by the side of the road. In the long term. This investment will pay off in the long term. For the record. For the record, I never agreed to this. In exchange for. I'll give you my apple in exchange for your orange. At once. Everything happened at once. On a budget. We are traveling on a budget this year. By request. The song was played by request. In the process of. We are in the process of moving house. At the heart of. Love is at the heart of their relationship. On the air. The radio station is on the air 24 hours a day. In balance. You need to keep your work and life in balance. For fear of. She didn't leave the house for fear of getting lost. In the name of. Stop in the name of the law. At the rate of. The car was traveling at the rate of 60 miles per hour. On the verge of. She was on the verge of tears. By heart. He knows the entire script by heart. In the event of. In the event of fire, use the stairs. At a disadvantage. Without a computer, I am at a disadvantage. On the go. I am always on the go from morning until night. In the first place. Why didn't you tell me in the first place? For real. Are you actually going to quit your job for real? In trouble. If you lose that watch, you will be in trouble. At hand. Help is always at hand when you need it. On the rise. Unemployment is on the rise again. By mail. You can send the application by mail. In the habit of. I am in the habit of drinking coffee every morning. At ease. The soldier stood at ease. On top of the world. I felt on top of the world after winning the race. In common. What do these two stories have in common? For the time being. This old phone will work for the time being. In shape. She runs every day to keep in shape. At a price. Success often comes at a price. On the whole. On the whole, I think we did a good job. By far. This is by far the best coffee I've ever had. In moderation. You should enjoy sweets in moderation. At risk. His job is at risk if he is late again. On duty. Who is the manager on duty? In detail. Can you describe the man in detail? For sale. Is that bicycle for sale? In the middle of. Don't interrupt me in the middle of a sentence. At first. At first, I thought he was joking. On purpose. Did you do that on purpose? By accident. I met her by accident at the supermarket. In debt. He is heavily in debt to the bank. At peace. The city is finally at peace after the war. On leave. Our teacher is on leave this month. In private. Can I speak with you in private? For a living. What do you do for a living? In response to. I am writing in response to your letter. At present. At present, all our rooms are full. On the menu. What is on the menu today? By law. You must pay taxes by law. In demand. Computer programmers are in high demand. At the latest. I'll be home by midnight at the latest. On the contrary. It's not cold, on the contrary, it's quite warm. In reality. He seems rich, but in reality, he has no money. At your service. I am always at your service. On display. The new cars are on display in the showroom. By hand. This furniture was made by hand. In order. Everything is in order for your trip. At random. The numbers were picked at random. On alert. The police are on alert for the suspect. In sight. The finish line is finally in sight. For the sake of. He works hard for the sake of his family. In writing. I want that promise in writing. At cost. He sold me the camera at cost. On strike. The workers are on strike for better pay. In any case. I might be late, but in any case, wait for me. For a change. Let's go to the park for a change. In conclusion. In conclusion, I would like to thank you all. At the age of. She learned to drive at the age of 18. On the spot. I had to make a decision on the spot. In stock. We don't have that size in stock. At the end of. There is a park at the end of the street. On the increase. Interest rates are on the increase. By check. Can I pay for this by check? In honor of. The dinner was in honor of the president. At the top of. He was at the top of his class. On business. He is away on business in Tokyo. By profession. He is a doctor by profession. In power. The current government has been in power for 10 years. At the wheel. It's dangerous to sleep at the wheel. On demand. Music is now available on demand. In step with. We must keep in step with the times. For keeps. Is this gift for keeps? In control. You need to stay in control of the situation. At the thought of. She laughed at the thought of it. On the surface. On the surface, the plan looks simple. In association with. We are working in association with a local school. For use. This area is for public use only. In season. Peaches are in season during the summer. At a standstill. The project is at a standstill due to lack of money. On the road. We have been on the road for 6 hours. In advance. You should book your tickets in advance. At short notice. Thank you for helping me at short notice. On behalf of. I am speaking on behalf of my family. In the long run. It will be better for you in the long run.